Mommy, help! I'm so cold. I can't go inside the house. The voice belonged to my daughter, who was only 5 years old, and she was calling me on a communal phone while I was on a business trip. I remembered that the forecast said to be careful for pretty frigid temperatures that evening, and it was actually so cold that it was threatening to snow, which is rare around here in Mississippi. And from how she sounded, she seemed to be calling me all alone. What the hell was my husband doing? What did my daughter mean that she couldn't go inside the house? In any case, I immediately knew then that my husband was doing terrible things to her, and once rushed back home to be with her and make her feel safe. I found my husband lying there unconscious for some reason. This is the story of how our, for lack of a better word, strange life together quickly came to a close, and how I discovered that some people are a lot harder to change than others. My name is Carrie, and I'm a 32-year-old mother of one little girl of 5 years old, whose name is Shannon. I would tell you that my husband Paulo, who is 35 years old, was unemployed and looking for a job right when our story began. Then he would definitely get angry. But the fact remains, at that point in time, he didn't have a job, and I could do nothing better when it comes to phrasing his situation at the time. Paulo used to work as a construction worker, but an accident at work caused him a pretty bad injury to the knee, and he could no longer work much physical labor because of the injury. He also said he didn't want to work in the construction field anymore, and he was trying to change jobs, but it wasn't easy in this day and age. And that's why I had become mainstay of the family while Paulo took care of the house and our daughter. The fact that Shannon is blessing us with her presence makes it mandatory for at least one of us to work. I was offered a full-time job right around that time too, so now I am the one working. And there was another reason why I broke the common custom that a man brings home the bacon and a woman keeps to cooking the bacon at home. Paulo's moral harassment towards me was unbearable at one point. Even though my husband and I were both working our own jobs right after we got married, he always said something along the lines of,
"Don't tell me what to do when I'm the one paying for everything we do."
Paulo was the kind of person who said that the person who made the money is the one who has more authority and freedom in the house, and he didn't want me to pay for anything other than our living expenses. This wasn't because of Paulo being a strict person with his money, but rather because of a feeling of resentment towards me, who had the audacity to use the money he'd broken his back in making for his sake and not ours. He was very possessive of anything financial, and whenever I asked him for something in addition to the living expenses, he often responded with some nasty things to my face. And of course, when one is pregnant, one can't work as much as one would like, and doing the housework also becomes something difficult. But even in such a situation, Paulo never changed his attitude.
"You can't even make money, so you should at least do the housework,"
he childishly complained. So in a way, this is my revenge against him. Paulo had never done any housework while he was still working in construction. But I still knew he could do it all no problem, especially because of his arrogant big talk to me. The day his doctor advised him to quit his job was coincidentally the same day that I was offered a full-time job. I tried to make a big deal out of it because it was such amazing news to me that I was able to work a full-time and get a better pay. And in response, Paulo said,
"Well, you know what? Of course I can do everything. Better yet, I can do it so much better than you. I'll do everything perfectly and prove to you that you've been spoiled during the whole time that I was working."
And that's how we get to the life that we are living right now. Now, I don't want you to think that we are what you would call a couple that doesn't get along well. Consider it more like it's a relationship that's good enough that he and I are good together enough to fight, so to speak. It's only ever been the fact that we've been able to work it out so far by using the same strategy over and over again. And besides that, no one gets anything right the first time, and that's especially true for housework. Everyone also has their own way of doing household chores. That's why I didn't say anything till Paulo found his own way and got used to doing the housework. I'm not that much of a devil at heart, and I've had my own experiences of struggling until I got used to housework. While I did want him to understand how my life had been while I was in charge of the house, I didn't want to push my husband all that hard. I just want him to know well how hard housework really is. Money is not the only proof of hard work, and I wanted my entire family to understand that a little more. Paolo gradually became accustomed to the housework, as though he began to understand my experiences. I knew how he operated, so I sometimes said something like, "Oh damn, your omelet is burnt, Paolo." I teased him, essentially, and instead of apologizing or blowing up, he always answered with something along the lines of,
You're better at frying eggs than I am. I'll make a better omelet than you one of these days and make Shannon happy.
He would keep at it with a grin on his face. Through these exchanges, my husband and I were getting along pretty well, and he was truly beginning to understand how hard housework was. I occasionally did something to help out. For example, I would put the laundry that had piled up into the machine while he put Shannon to bed. And this was something totally new that sprang from this system of married life. He said to me,
Thank you.
The fact I was surprised to hear him say so is probably a good testimony as to how much of a difficult time it was for me when I was doing everything at home. He had never once said thank you to me when I was more of a full-time housewife. I knew then that Paolo had truly changed, and I was so happy that I was able to change him for the better, my husband. But gradually, he began to act strangely. Around then, I was sometimes asked to go on business trips outside of town for days at a time, so I was away from home several times a month. This meant that Paolo and Shannon were alone together, with nothing but each other for a few days. In modern parlance, the wife was often acknowledged to be responsible for the house, and my daughter while the man went away for days or weeks at a time to make enough for his family to survive. In our situation, though, Paolo was the one who would take care of the house while I went to work and took Shannon to and from daycare. This is because the daycare center is on my way to work, and I was happy because I could walk with Shannon twice during the day. But from my husband's point of view, walking Shannon to the daycare is quite different. From my husband's point of view, this is the first time he has had to drop his daughter off at daycare, then come back, make lunch, clean the house, wash the dishes, look for a job at the employment security office, and then pick up his daughter again. All of these things yielded a time schedule with absolutely no free time to spare. And besides that, a 5-year-old daughter doesn't provide her parents with the luxury of adhering to an adult schedule. She would bring toys to her mom and dad to play with her. She would pull out a lot of picture books and ask to read to her. And she would get very naughty and demanding at night, claiming she didn't want to go to bed. Normally, I would assist Paolo with what appeared to be a literal nightmare, but this time I couldn't, simply because I wasn't going to be there. So even though it was only for a few days a month, he had no choice but to endure it. And by the time I had gone on several business trips, he looked physically and mentally exhausted. I was sure it was even harder for him because he wasn't used to it at all, and I've experienced the pain of housework and childcare all too thoroughly, and I didn't think my conscience would let me leave him like this. Therefore, I decided to alleviate his burdens for a single day by taking Shannon on a date together alone with Mommy. This was often done about a month after I started my business trips, and speaking with experience, after such a hard time, some time alone would really have been something awesome. On these days, which came to be known as days off duty or DODs, I also took charge of the housework so that my husband could take a complete rest. He was free to do whatever he wanted for that single day.
I mean, are you sure, Carrie?
He was so happy about the fact that I felt it was important for him to take a break. And so, we came to a mutual agreement to set aside a day once a month for him to refresh himself. This is also because I had been feeling that it was a huge thanks to Paolo that I was able to work a full-time job that paid very well. And, in fact, the effect of this refreshment day was so great that his housework efficiency improved the following day. And after a test run, I felt that it was perfectly fine for me to do the housework for a day or so, and it was not a burden on me in any way at all. Such was life, and a balanced life it was, until one day, it was my husband's DOD, and I was spending time with Shannon at the park that was nearest to our house. To my great surprise, a small earthquake struck. It was just a slight tremor, but Shannon and I both heard the characteristic rumble of the earth, as it did when a quake occurred. And that got me thinking, if we were separated from our daughter due to a natural disaster, it might be a good idea to teach her how to correctly look for her family, Perhaps it was a mother's instinct, but the threat of disaster was very real, albeit small, and that caused me to decide to study disaster prevention with my daughter. We were going to take it one step at a time. The first thing I taught her was how to use a communal payphone. Look, darling, if you take the hello part of this box and put this magic card in here, you can call me. How cool is that? Come to think of it, this was the first time my daughter had ever seen a communal payphone, let alone use one, and she was very curious about it. But what good is a payphone if you can't actually use it because you don't have any number of anyone to call? I gave her a functional phone card with money charged on it and a piece of paper with my phone number as an emergency contact number, and trained her to use it. On this particular occasion, I let her use my quarters to call my own cell phone, and I also let her call home and her grandma and grandpa's home until she learned how to use it properly. And I also said to her, if you ever think you need mommy's help, you always call me, okay, darling? I assured her that she could call me anytime I wasn't home if she needed my help for whatever reason. I told my daughter to put away her phone card and my contact information, and we both memorized the location of a few payphones. A few months later, I had an unscheduled business trip that suddenly popped out of nowhere, and it just so happened to coincide with Paolo's DOD, which I had planned in advance. Evidently, I panicked and told Paolo in a regretful tone of voice, I'm sorry, honey, but I have another business trip coming up. Will you please take care of Shannon? He was obviously not happy with the sudden change of schedule, mostly because he was planning to take the day off completely. I didn't blame him for planning ahead, and I felt bad about this. He was silent for a while before answering.
I understand.
And he agreed to take care of Shannon while I was gone. I felt worse. He willingly sacrificed more time and energy to care for our daughter while I went away on business. I thought I would do something special to make him feel much better on his new DOD that was to be rescheduled. But that night, when I was relaxing at my hotel, my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw the number was from a communal payphone. I instantly knew it was my daughter and picked up the phone. Hello? Mommy? I heard my daughter's trembling voice over the phone. I remembered that the forecast said to be careful for pretty frigid temperatures that evening, and it was actually so cold that it was threatening to snow, which is rare around here in Mississippi. The payphone is not far from the house, but the fact that she didn't use the house phone must have been something out of the ordinary was going on at home. I tried my best to speak to her as calmly as I could. What's wrong with Daddy, darling? Isn't he with you? Mommy, help! I'm so cold. I can't go inside the house. She told me that she had heard on TV that it was actually going to snow that night, and she went out in the yard because she wanted to see the snow fall. Paolo had told her to get back inside because it was getting colder and darker, but she wouldn't listen, and he got angry and locked her out. And it wasn't just on this occasion. Shannon had apparently endured this kind of thing more than once. There were times when Paolo was left in the car for a long while, and there were other times when she wasn't allowed to eat anything. But she never told me. She said she didn't want to ruin the good relationship between her, Mommy, and Daddy. I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry I wasn't strong. My heart was aching by this point, and I felt so sorry for her having to endure this pain. As Shannon continued to cry on the phone card seemed to run out of its charged amount, and the phone went dead. I immediately did two things. I first called the police and told them that my daughter was wandering around the neighborhood. I asked them to go out looking for her and to take her into custody. They were happy to oblige, and after providing them with an approximate address of where Shannon could be, and my phone number as a means to contact me, I hung up. I then went and called my boss and explained the situation to him. Mr. Klondike is a very flexible, very caring man, and I always felt lucky to have him as my boss. He listened intently and allowed me to head home to take care of the situation. The next morning, I jumped on the train to go home. Fortunately, the police called me on the train, saying that Shannon was taken into custody the previous night. I was able to pick her up right away. She felt cold to the touch, but she was not injured or sick, and I was so relieved to see her safe and sound. No sooner had Shannon seen me that she burst out running towards me and jumped into my arms, crying and whimpering. Those were the most heart-wrenching sounds I've ever heard in my life, And right then and there, I vowed I would never later allow another opportunity to make her this miserable again. My relief at her being safe quickly transformed into anger when the police asked me about what had happened. I honestly have no idea what happened, officer, but I'll go get my husband. He will shed some light on the matter, I'm sure. I called my parents and told them about the situation, and they agreed to take Shannon for the time being as I went home as I confronted Paulo. Paulo, do you have any idea what you've done? You are in big trouble, mister. I yelled angrily once I entered the house, but he didn't answer me. More to the point though, I didn't even hear a single sound. I thought he might have run away from the house, but his shoes were there in the entrance. I went to the living room only to discover him lying on the floor, unconscious. Paolo! Wait, what? Why? What's going on? I was surprised, but then I noticed that it was unusually hot in the living room. It didn't take long to find out why. The gas heater was left on. The windows were closed, and I rushed to open them and turned on the exhaust fan. Paolo was out cold, and I immediately called an ambulance. I was told by the doctor that he had carbon monoxide poisoning, and that if he had been found a little later, he would have been in serious trouble. I shuddered when I thought about what would have happened to my daughter if Paolo had let her back inside of the house in this environment. Don't get me wrong, of course, locking her outside the house and preventing her from coming back inside was unforgivable. But call that a stroke of luck, the silver lining in her dangerous situation. Fortunately, Paolo survived the poisoning and regained consciousness the next day, but that did not calm my anger. I questioned him angrily, and this is what he had to say.
Shut the frick up! It's all your fault! You're forcing me to do everything!
My husband shouted and revealed his true feelings for our life together. I wasn't surprised to find out he was truly struggling with the housework. Nothing he did went right, nothing he did got praised, and on top of that, when I wasn't around, our daughter was a bit of a rebel and didn't listen to him. Everything was going wrong, and as I gradually started making more money than he ever did, that psychological stress only added to the burdens the housework presented for him. This in turn caused his frustration to become a lot more difficult to manage, which made him more and more eager for a DOD to release all that negative energy and feel refreshed enough to start again. But my most recent business trip ruined everything. In a fit of anger, he locked Shannon outside and locked the windows and the doors so she couldn't get back inside. The old stove was blazing full force, and after some time, he fell asleep. The carbon monoxide levels in the room rose because he'd fallen asleep without ventilating the room properly, and his slumber eventually turned into a coma. You never helped me. You left me everything. I'm so freaking sick of it. Doing all the housework is a woman's job, but when I go out for a little fun, people ask me what I do as a job. I mean, what the hell is that kind of life for a man? Frick, even you think I'm some incompetent imbecile because I don't make enough money, don't you? That's what Paolo said, but to me, it was all nothing but paranoia. All things considered, what he's saying is that I made him do everything without helping him whatsoever. But when I was at home, I occasionally still did the laundry, washed the dishes, and even cooked dinner sometimes. And DODs, I let him do whatever he wanted. And when he was invited out for a drink with some friends, I let him go. Whether he felt the pressure of not having a job during these drinking parties, I didn't care. I'm sorry to say this, but compared to the life I had because he imposed it upon me when I was a more dedicated housewife, it's a pretty good time. My anger took over by this point, and I let him have it full force. What was it you said, though? Housework is a woman's job, was it? If you don't make enough money, you should at least do the housework, is what I believe you said when I was taking care of the house when you were still working in construction. And you think you were forced to do it all? You don't like it all because no one gave you any compliments? Don't you dare frickin' say such bullshit. Did you ever praise me when I was a housewife? Did you ever give me a day off to give me an opportunity to reboot myself? Did you help me with anything at all? Especially when I had morning sickness to deal with? No, you freaking did not. You put it all on me and took what I did for you for granted. Everything I did to you these past couple of years, you did to me in the past, but way, way worse. Don't freaking put what you did to me aside and selfishly complain about the system that we agreed upon.
Shut up! Shut the frick up!
Paolo was yelling in the hospital room, and a few of the nurses had to come in and ease the commotion. I apologize for any inconvenience I may have caused. I bowed to them, but my husband said nothing at all and just glared at me murderously. The nurses must have sensed that. They exchanged a glance with each other, and the older nurse said in a very sympathetic voice, "I'm sorry you're having a hard time, dear," and left. By this point, I knew that saying any more would be a nuisance to the hospital, so I decided to put the foot down. I rummaged through my backpack and brought out a file containing the divorce documents I was going to shove before my husband. Regardless of our relationship, it doesn't change the fact that you put Shannon in grave danger, and the neighbors have witnessed her being locked out on numerous occasions, and that despite her pleas to be let back in, you didn't heed her wishes until after a few hours. I am divorcing you, and I've called the police.
What? You called? Why the frick did you call the police?
Have you ever heard of abandonment by a person responsible for protection? You didn't bring your daughter into the house on a cold day and essentially threw your responsibilities to her out the window. She's in police custody as we speak, and you wouldn't believe the state she was in.
Wait a minute. Just because I let her out of the house?
Don't you dare say just because when you have no idea what she's going through, I said, and left the hospital room, outraged. After that, I hired a good lawyer and officially divorced him. Because of his moral harassment from a few years ago and the abuse he did to my daughter, Paolo was to blame for the divorce, and I sued him for alimony. Of course, there was no division of property for him either. He was later arrested by the police and released from jail for pleading guilty before a jury. But with his new criminal record, it will be even harder for him to find a new job that paid well. And yet, child support payments were merciless, and he is now living in an old, cheap apartment, working a day job to make ends meet, and on welfare support from the state. Of course, it's legally impossible for another party to shoulder the burden of child support, but my in-laws have taken care of the alimony and generously paid everything in a lump sum, so that's good enough for me. I really don't want to get child support from that bastard in the first place, but there are a few things better than having more money in order to give Shannon the great life she deserves. As for me, I'm now living with Shannon at my parents' home. At first, she cried because she couldn't see her daddy anymore, but gradually, she was healed by the kindness of her grandparents. Determined not to let my daughter go through that again, I gave her a little present, a Japanese-style handmade good luck charm bag. Inside the bag was the same telephone card that she had used the night she called me for help. According to her, the card was magic because it had saved her life. She would never let it out of her sight, so I made it into a good luck charm. Shannon loved the present. She still has it locked onto her kindergarten bag. And of course, I also put a new phone card and a piece of paper with my emergency contact information in her sack. But I promised to protect her so that the phone card I gave her will never be used in the future.